Okay. I don't know if you are aware of what I'm playing these days. I'm playing the Buddhist chant of compassion, and I'm letting it play as a background. And so that's what you were hearing while we were waiting.
So welcome. As part of preparing for this third week now in the Lenten creative series, I want to step back and look at these ideas from a little bit of a different point of view this morning, okay? Sometimes the simplest thing about these creative processes.
Are you hearing this pretty clear and clear?
Yes.
Okay.
That have a certain number of steps is to forget about trying to figure out how the steps all work together or separately or individually or whatever, and just to look at the numbers themselves. And I want to just suggest this morning that if you find yourself getting confused and lost, this is not a bad way to get yourself back grounded and oriented and focused. And the tendency of human beings is we tend to doubt ourselves so quickly. We tend to get confused by the most, insignificant distractions of life and start thinking we don't understand. When if we would just settle down a little bit and remember the truth we already know, these things are much simpler than we make them with our over intellectualizing and busyness. So take the numbers themselves. We are now in week 3 of the creative process, step 3. In the interpretation of the Genesis story, which we use as the model or the allegory of how we create, how our consciousness follows and recapitulates the creative process of God. And so in week 3, we're going to work with the number 3. The ancient Greeks, in particular Pythagoras, said, and he was not just using this as a metaphor, he said the numbers are gods. If you can grasp for a moment, and put aside, of course, the idea that of that personal God in the sky, which there is no such critter, okay? But what is God anyway? And the ancient Greeks had some very sophisticated concepts of God, and one of them was the concept of numbers, the mystery of science and numerology and a lot of Jewish mysticism. Approach to a very profound understanding of one way of thinking about God. When I talk about things like this, realize it's not the only way. So don't go getting in arguments about it. It's a way to help us think. That's all. So when Pythagoras says numbers are gods, he's on to something there that can be very helpful as far as bringing the complexity of this creative process down to a very simple focus. So if you take, say, the first 3 steps where we are today, it goes from step 1, let there be light. One thing, there's nothing but God. One thing, and God said, let there be light. Or as we interpret it, let there be an idea. Let me have a clue. Let me have a little bit of guidance here as to what's really going on. Who am I and what am I here for and how did I get here? And what's my purpose for being here? And what do I really want and need in life? And all that sort of thing. See? One thing in week 1, let there be light. In week 2, last week, in Genesis, it says, let there be a firmament, God says. In the midst of the water, dividing the water into 2 parts, the water above the firmament, the water below the firmament. In other words, on day 2, or step 2, one thing becomes 2 things. We're moving from the spiritual, invisible side of life to the visible, manifest side of life, see? And these are the steps you go through. And the numbers correspond to what's happening. So in step 2, it says God creates the firmament and divides the waters from above the firmament to the waters below the firmament, and the firmament he calls heaven. Heaven, in other words, is not a place, it's a state of mind. So that's a way or a vantage point to view your life. That's what that was last week. And so for our practical work last week, we talked about doing some things like collecting the clues that we came upon, perhaps in week 1 by affirming let there be light, collect all the clues into a sort of from your birth, your situation of incarnation, your parents, the situation of your life, the activities and the experiences you've had, and all the things that could be considered clues to the mystery of your purpose in life and your true needs and the true changes that need to be made. So last week we said in a practical way, just now begin, just like God, allegorically on day 2, divided things into 2 piles, or 2 levels. Now create 2 piles of your clues. The clues that are good that you want to expand on and work with and develop and create and make more, like health, money, love, creativity, right place in your career, right home, right relationships and all that sort of thing. And then divide the other clues into another pile, the negative pile, the pile that you want to get rid of. That has to do with things like ill health and poverty and all the various kinds of limitations, psychologically, materially, and everything else in our life. And just, in other words, simplify by just looking at 2 things at a time, not asking what do I do with them then, but just sort them out. Now we're in step 3. And on step 3 in Genesis, it says, now that God's sitting there on the firmament, which is an allegory for where you are right now, sitting on your firmament, which is a point of view, looking at your 2 piles, okay? And the negative pile is probably even bigger than the positive pile, and that doesn't matter. And then so on the 3rd day, you're sitting there in heaven. Okay, we know we're not always there, but this is what you try to do in your practical work throughout the week. You try to get to a state of consciousness where you can see things as they really are, and in particular, to see yourself. See, that's what's so important about this separating of the clues, to separate out the negative self aspects that need to be renounced or need to be sacrificed coming up next week in step 4 when we begin the evolutionary process of the creation. So for this week, we want to go to just 3, though. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So the number 3, consider it to be a God. Even in our Christian tradition, the number 3 is considered a God. It's the Holy Spirit, basically. That's what the Trinity signifies in its true metaphysical meaning, as opposed to all the various dogmatic interpretations of the Trinity. So God is 3. God is 1, and then last week God is 2, and now God is 3. See, the Trinity. Or you can even, if you have a more traditional Christian bent, there's no reason why you can't just go ahead and call this 3rd step the Holy Spirit. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's exactly what it is. That's what the Holy Spirit is. It is the 3rd element in the Trinity that recombines the opposites, that otherwise go off on tangents and form what is called evil in the material world. The 3rd part of the Trinity, or the Holy Spirit, is the aspect of God that causes evolution of good, among other things, see? So this week it says in the Genesis story, on the 3rd day of creation, God sitting there like you on his firmament in heaven, looking at his 2 piles, and he says, okay, now, with these 2 piles of clues, let some kind of a plan begin to emerge from this clutter, okay? In other words, he says, let the dry land appear. That's how it's allegorically described. Let the dry land appear, or the vegetation in particular. The dry land with vegetation arising out of these 2 sort of amorphous puddles of water that he's looking at, or these 2 cluttered piles of clues that you have in your mind, or in your 2 columns in your list, or in your closet, or wherever you put them. So now the challenge in the 3rd week is to form, so that better evolve out of it. And now we're talking about the great conception of a divine idea, because that's what we're working with here. That's how God creates, through ideas, and that's how we create. through ideas. Divine ideas as opposed to intellectual ideas. We have to mention just a moment and make sure that we're not on the wrong track here. If you studied academic philosophy or psychology or any academic discipline usually, ideas tend to be considered to be rather inanimate. They are owned by people. You allegedly here in the material world can even, get patents on ideas and copyright ideas and stuff like that. Not really. But the idea that most people have about ideas is that they're limited somehow, that they're passed from one person to another, that you have to find somebody very wise in order to get a good idea or read the right book or something. The ideas we're talking about, divine ideas, which is the way God creates, have nothing to do with academic definitions of ideas. Okay, so put that aside. Divine ideas in the symbolism of the scriptures are angels. That's what divine ideas are. They are angels. That's one way of describing what a divine idea is. I think it's a helpful way for people who are into that, but for people who have an obstacle about angels, and a lot of people who had traditional religious backgrounds have, put that aside, okay? And let's think about ideas as something else. You are an idea. That's what you are, a divine idea. That's how you got here. God created you as a divine idea. You exist eternally on the realm of ideas. That's what happens when you die. When your body dies, you reawaken to your eternal form, which is as an idea, or another word for that is soul. That's all. So, you see, it's not something abstract. It's something real. It is, in fact, the part of you that you are sitting there right now feeling your sense of self in. See? And as I mentioned last Sunday, if your body drops over dead from crowdedness or heat exhaustion or anything here, doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. The idea is still there, and it's still conscious, and it goes on to your next experience in life. Nothing is really lost except here in the emotional level of the material world. So ideas, I'm emphasizing this morning to give us an idea of the reality of ideas, because that's all we're working with. So our challenge this week is to somehow then bring these two piles of clues into the form of a divine idea. And I'll say one more thing about divine ideas, and then I'm going to go on and talk about now some practical examples of using this Trinity to create your own life. We have a saying in Unity that divine ideas come to you pregnant with infinite possibilities for expression. That's a very important definition of a divine idea. It puts aside the need to sit and ask those other doubting questions that our insecure ego always wants to clutter things up with, like, well, where's the money going to come from, for example? Not that that would cross your minds. You're all prosperous, I know. But, or, well, I don't know, I didn't have the education for this, or, I'm not good looking enough, or I'm not skinny enough, or, whatever. No, if you can get a hold of a divine idea, in other words, if you can now begin to form these fragmentary clues to your purpose in life, your goals and desires, and the things you want to be rid of, those three categories of things, if you can now begin to form them into something called a divine idea, then the idea in the evolutionary stage, starting next week of the creative process, begins to take on a life of its own. That's what it means to say that a divine idea comes pregnant with infinite possibilities for expression. Another way of saying that is simply that a divine idea brings with it the means to its end. Do you follow that? In other words, you don't have to worry about how is this possible, or where is the money coming from, or anything like that. If you truly have a divine idea, and it's an idea whose time has come, and you are the right channel for that idea, these are a lot of ifs, of course. That's why we must work, as particularly this week, to clarify our vision and our values, because we want to make sure it's a divine idea. We want to make sure it's an appropriate divine idea for you, for who you really are, not for who you wanted to be when you were a teenager, or who your parents wanted you to be, or any of those other, false starts that we all have in life, but an idea whose time has come, that the universe needs, that is needed by other people, and that is needed by you for the fulfillment of your purpose, see? So that's saying a lot. That's saying quite a bit, but it's still a very simple thing. Because, and here's where I think most people sort of lose the point and get off track in this creative process, is that's your business. To get in touch with the idea, to entertain the idea, and then think of it as being sort of a midwife for the idea, the care and feeding of the idea, or something like that that works for you, okay? Instead of this other thing that we are always tempted to do on the ego level, which is run around and try to make things happen, which usually gets in the way of the evolution of the idea, which already has within it. If you will listen to it and work with it, that's why we call it co-creation. God does God's part, we do our part, okay? And your part is to co-create by using yourself as a channel for the manifestation of a divine idea which comes from God. So your part is to make sure you have the right idea, that you're the right person to have that idea, that it's an appropriate idea whose time has come, and all those other sorts of things, okay? Not running around fundraising or trying to sell your idea to somebody else inappropriately at this point, or convert other people to your point of view, or any of those other things that people waste their lives doing, see, including worrying about all those things. That's why it's important to remember. Divine ideas come pregnant with infinite possibilities for expression. They have within them the means to their own end. And I should add perhaps one more thing about that. Those means to the end appear only when they are called forth by need. That's an important point too, folks. So instead of sitting there thinking, well, I don't know, I still don't see the whole thing. I don't see it yet. You may say it has the means to the end, but I don't see it. You're not supposed to see it yet. You're not there yet, see? We are always trying to get ahead of ourselves. That's why taking this creative process in a period of time, the 7 weeks of Lent, is so effective and powerful. If you will, a little bit, train your mind to be a little bit less needy and a little bit less, a little bit more patient, okay? A lot more patient, I should say, perhaps, for most of us, okay? Is one of the big secrets of this process, being a lot more patient. So let me go on then and talk a little about the importance then of understanding this Trinity, the third step that we're into right now, when God creates on the third day the dry land and the vegetation. When he says, by the way, the vegetation, this is one of the most beautiful passages, I think, in the whole creation story, where on this day God creates, among other things, the fruit trees, in which the fruit itself has the seed of its own regeneration. That's an allegory for a divine idea, as we've been just, and that's a miracle if you think about it. The fruit tree, the apple, has within it a seed that if it falls into the ground and gets nurtured and grows, becomes a whole new tree, you see. That's a metaphor for what you are to do with your life and your soul here in this incarnation. Or you could say, as some reading in one esoteric writer, he says, one of what we're doing here, one way of describing what this metaphysical approach to Christianity is, that Unity teaches, says one way of describing it is, it's the attempt to become a seed instead of a leaf on a tree. The majority of souls go through lives and they grow, yes, they're part of their tree and they grow and they become a leaf. And for a little while they say, oh, this is great. It feels so good. The sun is out. Rain, nice, all kinds of nice things happening. But then, wait a minute. All of a sudden it's getting chilly. And what's all this yellow around the edges here? And, whoa, I'm putting on weight, what's going on here? Entropy, okay? And then all of a sudden, whoops, the wind came up and I fell. And now I'm on the ground. And I'm just a yellow crumpled up leaf. And instead of growing, like if you had evolved to the level of being a seed instead of a leaf, I'm perhaps doing this metaphor, but it's a helpful one, okay? It's one that you can remember every time you take a walk. You don't want to become a leaf. A leaf has a very limited potential in the life cycle of a tree. A seed, that's what you want to be. So this is, of course, in other words, of how to become a seed instead of a leaf, okay? Now, to go from 2 to 3 then, which is what the numbers are, as we said earlier, numbers are gods in this sense, to go from 2 to 3, this is the critical point where you bypass becoming part of the problem or creating more evil. If everything just keeps evolving on the level of 2, the realm of opposites, as we see in the material world here, then the tendency is for one side to seem good and the other side to seem evil. And that's the original, where evil comes from, see? So this third point is critical, the Holy Spirit, as the reconciling force that brings together the polarity of existence. And notice then that the polarity here in the material world is necessary for creation. It's not bad. It's only bad if the third element is not discovered. And that's another way of describing the leaf on the tree never got to number 3. It only spent its life in step 1 and step 2. The seed got to number 3, see? And thus is regenerated and has a creative potential of its own. So the 3 is the important key to this first involution stage of the creative process. What we use in our consciousness to bring this about is called the imagination. The vision. That's why, among other things, this is the fun part, folks, okay? This really is. This is the time to become as a child and to open your mind and to exercise your imagination this week. How can you make something good, something desirable? And desire here is really the key. That's what your imagination does. It brings the power of desire to the creative process. And I would say, folks, that all these things you've read in self-help books and New Thought and Unity books even about they usually call it the creative power of thought or the attractive magnetic power of thought. There's no such thing, okay? Well, it is, but it's a very weak force, okay? Thankfully, it's a very weak force. If you start paying attention to your thoughts, okay? Thank God it is a weak force. The power behind that description, however, of creative abilities is the power of desire. And that is the whole key. And that's the key to this step. By getting your desire stoked up, you engage your emotions or your feelings, which are literally the thing that causes material things to move, to vibrate. This is how you heal your body, by desiring it, by not just abstractly, impotently picturing it and wishing it, but by engaging your feelings until you feel desire, until something vibrates and moves. As Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, said, when you heal your body, the very atoms in your body tremble and move and rearrange their order, and that's how healing happens. It's not an abstraction. It's something that you actually do, see? But you have to get in there to do it, and you have to bring together the 2 things, the idea in your mind first through the thinking faculty, the fact of what you're desiring, and then its emotional equivalent. Or, how much more simple can we get here? It's the male and female principles, the divine male and feminine, masculine and feminine principle coming together to conceive something new. When I said earlier, you all know this on some level of your being, I was not being facetious. We all know this, and furthermore, we've all experienced it as recently as when we got born, okay? That's exactly how you got here in the first place. I don't want to spend time talking and trying to explain the birds and the bees to you folks. I think we all know that, I hope. Or if you don't, you need to read a biology book or something, or call Dr. Ruth or whoever that is, give you some help there. But the human process of procreation, for our purposes, is a metaphor for what we are doing in our consciousness now, okay? The bringing together, well, let's go ahead and talk about the birds and the bees, okay? Why not? Your mother and your father recognized each other across a crowded room once, and at that point you were still only a potential, hanging around, as Plato says, on the plains of forgetting, when you hadn't yet, incarnated, yet you were ready with a plan in mind. And then the right gene pool over here, your father, was guided, or accidentally, some people think, got a blind date or something with your mother over here, the other half of the appropriate gene pool, okay? And as you all know, you go through that many times and nothing happens, right? Nothing happens. On all levels, nothing happens, okay? On some levels, something may happen, but it doesn't result in something like you, okay? So there's a third element. So now we're back to the Trinity. Your mother and your father had the potential. It's the first and the second force. And we don't have to get into positive, negative, male, female, right, wrong, or good, evil, or anything like that. It's opposites. That's all it is. See? So what's the third element that in that case brought you into being? The simplest way to describe it is desire. It was desire, that's all. And your mother says, oh, I lost my head. You know? Your father in those days would say, another notch on my belt. But what really happened? What really happened was the Holy Spirit, which is another name for desire in this case. That's one of the ways the Holy Spirit manifests, is as desire, to bring together two, I hope I'm not offending anybody with all this X-rated description here, but it's really simple, folks. It's really not all that hard. We do it all the time, or some of us do it all the time. Now I'm going to stick to my script, okay? Okay, so look at it like this. 3 things, okay? Now we're going to go back to the project. We're going to go right now back to your project. 3 things. And here's where I kind of wish I had a visual aid, okay? You have one thing here, and you have one thing here. That's 2 things on the same level, okay? Now here's the third thing here. Trying here to get serious. It's called, okay, let me tell you about some philosophy. In Marxism, they say everything evolves through the reconciliation of opposites. There is a thesis. This is called a dialectic in philosophy. There's a thesis. There's an antithesis of the thesis, an opposite, in other words. And then out of that comes a synthesis, or a third point of view, or a third thing. And in philosophy, in the history of idealism in particular, if you're interested in philosophy, go back and read Hegel for an example of this, the German idealist. He developed this idea way beyond anybody else in history of philosophy, where everything evolves according to this dialectic of opposites here in the material world, and it's true, okay? The only problem with that idealism in philosophy was it was so abstract, there was no way to really apply it to life. So all we're doing in unity, new thought, transcendentalism, whatever you call this movement, is taking the philosophy of idealism and combining it with some particular North American pragmatism of, say, William James, the philosopher at Harvard who developed the American philosophy of pragmatism, and then learning how to use it to apply these truths to things like healing your body, manifesting money, solving relationship problems, finding your right place, discovering your purpose, expanding your career, all those kind of things. See, in other words, taking the abstract philosophical insights of idealism, which have been around since the ancient Greeks, and figure out a way to apply them to our lives instead of just endlessly talking about them and thinking about them and teaching them and making them more and more boring. Use them is the whole key, see? So the 3 points then, this is where it becomes now necessary for our practical work in the coming week to apply it to something real. So let's assume now that these 2 piles of clues that you've developed up till now, you have some things that you kind of want to bring into being that are turning into sort of a pile of goals. Let's call them goals, okay? You have some goals now. And over here, you have this other pile of clues. And they are things that you realize that you really have gone about as far as you can go with, you know. Old, unnecessary, mechanical, emotional cycles that are getting tiresome even to you, you know, much less everybody else. And habits that maybe at one point helped you and all that sort of thing, but have reached their point of maximum benefit and have gone over the line into, you know, if there's it costs more so financially, emotionally, and physically and everything else than the benefits that they bring. And so we all have some things that we know it's time to move away from. They can be relationship things, they can be physical habits like alcoholism, drug abuse, eating disorders, it can be any number of things. It can be emotional patterns that have come to the point that they are now self-destructive, or it can be opinions that are outdated, that we prided ourselves on at one time, but that are no longer helpful for our present reality and things like that. So it requires some introspection to some degree and self-honesty in particular to separate these piles, okay? So you have a pile of goals and you have a pile of, let's call them things that we want to release or sacrifice, okay? But those are on the same level. So now let's go back to our metaphor of 3 things. The third force you want to find then is something bigger. The principle here in metaphysics is things cannot be solved, problems cannot be solved on the level where they exist, okay? And that is a universal truth. Even Einstein claimed that in the realm of physics. In fact, that's who said that quote. Einstein, he said, the problems we face as human beings cannot be solved on the level where they exist. You must get to a higher level. In its most simple form, in unity, we use our 4 functions of consciousness that we talked about last week, the 4 levels of cause to illustrate this. Physical diseases cannot be healed on the material plane. Cutting a tumor out of your body or nuking it or something is not healing, okay? That's erasing symptoms or manipulating matter. That's not healing, okay? It's okay and it's good, and if you need that done, you should do it. But it's not healing. To heal something, you need to go to the next level. To heal a physical disease, you need to go to the level of emotion or feeling, which is the next level. The level that vibrates and moves things, okay? Moves and rearranges the cells and the organs and the atoms of your body into a healthy form. And beyond that, you will see that a mental illness, for example, or an emotional problem cannot be healed on the level of emotions. That's why all the attempts to get in touch with your feelings and working on feelings and a lot of psychotherapy, it works to a degree, in a sense, the same way that material medicine works. When you've gone too far, or use the building here as an example, when the beams get too rotten, you got to get them out of there before the roof falls in, right? And replace them. See, the same thing with your body. And the same thing with emotions then. It can help to vent, it can help to talk about them and all that sort of thing. But the real healing for emotional problems, depression or anything like that, anger and things like that, has to come on a higher level, the mental level, which has to do with reforming your thoughts and concepts and beliefs, see? Such as about who you are and what God is and all those other things that we're doing here. And the same thing about that. Mental problems really can't be healed either on the mental level. That's where philosophy reaches its ultimate point of diminishing return. Mental problems eventually lead to the realization that you need a spiritual solution, see? And so that's sort of the ascending level here of an example of the principle that problems cannot be healed on the same level that they exist. Now go back to your goals and the things you want to be rid of. 2 piles sitting right here on the same level. The problem is when you just work on goal setting and on getting rid of things and forgiveness and giving up and all that sort of thing that most self-help stuff focuses on, you get entangled in your own effects. That's what Charles Fillmore, founder of Unity, called it. He said, when you try to solve these problems or achieve your goals or change your life on the level of good and bad only, things you want and things you don't want, you set up a situation called consciousness entangled in its own effects, which is another term for evil. Okay, that's what it is. And thus we create more problems. So now at this third step of the creative process, what is required is to find a higher purpose for this. And this is, we get back now to our purpose in life as something distinct from your goals and needs. Your goals and needs might be things like healing your body, or getting a better job, or fixing your love life, or making some money, or, anything, whatever they are. Those are real needs and they're legitimate goals to have in life. But they're not enough, see? They are on the level of personal need. That's why. And the same thing with the things you want to be rid of. I'm going to once and for all this year forgive my mother or my mother-in-law or my ex-husband or ex-wife or children or whoever it is that you're holding these grudges against and resentments. But it never gets done on that level because there's not enough power there on that level. It's just like with the goals. You advance a little bit, okay? But then next year you got to come back and fix something else. So what we're doing and what Unity has been designed to do from day one, although it's not always followed that original purpose or objective, is to go the other level, to the other level, and take, for example, the teaching of Jesus where he says, by their fruits you will know them. Now, as we know metaphysically, interpreting scripture, which is mythology, it is not dictated directly by God, okay? There's no such thing, there's no such God. It is mythology and it is allegorical. And therefore, even things like the sayings of Jesus have many different levels of interpretation. Here's one level of interpretation of that thing, by their fruits you will know them, that all New Age and New Thought and self-help books usually quote. They say, if it is true and if it works, then you should be demonstrating it. In other words, they say that's an interpretation of the teaching of Jesus that says, by their fruits you will know them, not by what they brag about or claim to be able to do or advertise or any of those things, but what they demonstrate. Can you heal? Can you demonstrate prosperity? Can you harmonize your relationships and all those things? Can you create, in other words, see? But here's another meaning that I want to suggest for those of you who are ready now to take the step into the truly effective application of this creative process. There's a higher meaning to that teaching of Jesus than by their fruits they will know them, meaning that can you heal, can you demonstrate money and stuff like that. It's by the nature of their fruits. So here, let's consider the possibility, although there's nothing wrong with working on healing, prosperity, and relationships, and cleaning up your past through forgiveness and things like that, and we will continue to work on those, but they are on the bottom level, okay? The secret to getting that done permanently, easily, effectively, and lovingly is to get above it. And there's my suggestion that the higher meaning of that teaching of Jesus, that by their fruits you will know them. In other words, what are they working on is the way to ask it. And you all know a lot of people that are very proud of and addicted to, you might even say, their prosperity teachings. And endlessly going to prosperity workshops and seminars and stuff like that, and endlessly working on treasure mapping and demonstrating and getting a new car this year and another one 3 years later when that's all rusted out, and on and on and on. And there's no end to those things that can be worked on that level, see? Same thing with healing. Are you still, here's a way to understand that teaching of Jesus from a higher perspective, and it's not critical, okay? I hope I'm not giving the impression here that I'm criticizing people who are working on that level, because we all need to continue to work on that level until we're perfect, okay? And we're not there yet. So it's okay to have those needs, but that's not where the work gets done. The work gets done by hooking yourself up to a higher purpose. In other words, have you begun to consider the possibilities of using this creative process not just for your own personal needs anymore? Because until you get beyond that, folks, it really, I almost sometimes would suggest you drop it. Because it's not that much better than the traditional material approach to life, which is based on competition and belief in limits and exploitation and all that. It's some better than that, okay? But it's not permanent. And you're always having more things to do. The rest of that statement of Jesus goes something like this, where he says, if you seek first the kingdom of heaven or the consciousness, then all these other things will be added on to you. And that can be taken literally at its very highest level. That the secret to solving these chronic health problems and money problems and dysfunctional relationship problems that we are all so tired of hearing about, much less having, okay? The secret to all that is get above that level of neediness. Oh, I hope this is not too harsh, folks, but if it is, we're too full anyway, so I don't care. It's true, okay? It really is. So the clue this week I want to give you is, see if you can't now take this statement on the third day of creation. God says, let now the dry land appear. Our translation of that is, let the plan for my life appear. Let me sort this pile of clues here into some actual goals. And let me sort this pile of clues into some actually categories of things that I want to release and forgive. And I'm going to suggest that you just do that and then put aside the level, the category of things you want to release until perhaps around week 6, when we'll do a lot of work on that, forgiveness and release, right in the week leading up to Easter. That's the easiest time to do it. You're going to be suffering anyway. You might as well just use it for that purpose, see? And it's very easy at that time. Why waste your time doing that now? It's much more, as I said earlier, this is the fun part. So get interested in the goals. So now this week you begin a third pile of clues that have to do with my purpose in life, my higher purpose than just fixing up made in the past. Health, money, dysfunctional relationships, and so on, okay? By doing so, you put in force this law of 3, or the Trinity, see? And then you hook yourself up to all the power in the universe. That's God, that third force. That purpose is your connection to God. And then these little things, folks, are so easy. They are, I know you hear me say this, and some of you think it's not true, but it is much easier than you make it. It's much easier to demonstrate money and prosperity than most people make it. You try way too hard in the wrong directions, that's all. And it's much easier to heal than most people make it. And it's much, much easier to solve those relationship problems than the endless spending your life, it's therapy and stuff like that. So the key is find that third element. The vegetation, folks, in other words. The vegetation appears, and lo and behold, the tree bears fruit, and the fruit has the seed within it to reproduce another whole tree. And that's an example of a divine idea that we're going to try to give birth to this week on the inner planes of our minds. Hold the negative things at least until next week, and then you might want to start thinking about, on the material plane, something to sacrifice. So if you've been holding out some habit to change during Lent, or from New Year's even, get ready for next year to be next week, okay? Week 4, when we move into the evolutionary phase, to be the time to have something to sacrifice, because that gives you an added surge of power and energy. Conscious suffering, a little bit of conscious suffering for a little while, folks, will go a long way toward opening up this third point of view or potential. And that's a way of using this energy in a wise, limited, short-term form for great, abundant, long-term benefits. The affirmation I want to leave us with this week then, and again, this is a week to be childlike, so do your treasure mapping this week. Make pictures, visualize things, make plans, get the plans on paper, get pictures, visualize, go test drive a Mercedes, Go visit your dream home and act like, a serious buyer. The realtors and the auto dealers are going to be so busy this week, folks, because and you're going to have the money here real soon if you get on with this, so you can go ahead and do it. So you might as well go ahead. That's how you stoke up the fires of desire, which is what's necessary right now. So whatever that takes for you, become childlike, get into creating pictures and artwork and collecting and going and seeing things and all that sort of thing. The affirmation, as I said, the dry land appears, means basically let the plan appear in its threefold nature now. Okay, including a higher purpose, and let those clues begin to fall into place too, because that's where you really hook into the power. And then the other affirmation I want to suggest that you use on a daily basis to invoke the power of imagination goes like this. It's our traditional unity affirmation for imagination. I see new and creative ways of doing what is mine to do. And see is the clue here, because in this stage, what we need to do is not make things different, but see things right. We are now on the firmament created in the past step, and now look at things anew. So the affirmation is, I see with my outer and inner eye both, okay? New and creative ways of doing what is mine to do. And for those of you who have not yet been satisfied with the power of faith built up in the last stage, I'll give you a clue here just in closing now. We say sometimes in unity that the traditional thing about faith, which is the skeptical view, that says, I'll believe it when I see it. We say that's backwards and upside down. That for most people who work metaphysically, the opposite is true. You will see it when you believe it. Now, some people are stuck on either side of this dilemma. For some people who aren't good at visualizing, they keep saying, well, I don't know. I'm trying to build my faith, but I still can't see it, okay? The whole key to this step of building the fires of desire and invoking the power of the imagination is to get into it. So if you're one of those people who can't use the metaphysical rule, you will see it when you believe it. Turn it around this week, okay? And go ahead and settle for, I will believe it when I see it, okay? This week, use the imagination to help you see it, and at the same time, you are reinforcing the faith faculty from last week, and you will gradually then begin to believe it, okay? Let's close on that note and take a moment now to sort of get ready for the week ahead and internalize now and prepare ourselves. The formula we're using here, you can have anything you want in life. If number one, you know what you want, your purpose. If number two, you expect to receive it, have faith in the possibility. And now step three, if you passionately desire to attain it. So this week, whatever is necessary to invoke the power of passion and desire, to see it, to visualize. Thank you, God, for the opportunities that come our way this week to be childlike and to dream. Through these means do we grow.
Well, sweet people, can you unmute yourself so we can have a little gathering, formulate maybe some questions that you have for yourself mostly. We are not the answer. Your internal self is the answer. But I just wondered if any of you are willing to share what stood out or what caught your attention, that you're willing to share with this lovely group of people. Anybody want to speak up. Have something to say?
I had something.
Yes, Marjorie, thank you.
Yeah, I was so relieved to hear him talking about desire, because somehow desire can so often have less positive connections to do with greediness and things like that. And to see how important desire is, I think that was a real revelation for me, actually.
Right. Yeah, I feel at this point in my life that anything to do with the soul purpose, a good question is what do you feel passionate? And I use the word passion. What do you feel passionate about? Or if I ask you, would you volunteer on this? Don't say yes unless you can feel passionate about it, because that is exactly what you're saying, Marjorie. Is there's something about the fire of desire and passion that are so important, I think, on the spiritual path. Yes, thank you. Well, you are an artist and desire, you understand more about this. I always think artists understand about the connection of passion and creativity.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look at what does desire mean in terms of our faculties and in terms of different levels of awareness, desire, passion equals love. So he's right that we don't create anything unless we're in love with it.
Yeah.
And
the feeling that comes with it, because the feeling really follows the thought.
Right. So the way to translate, if you will, our divine power of desire is that is the power of love, which is extremely powerful.
A couple of years ago, if I may speak, and this was at Unity of Montreal, we had a tea party. And I remember saying we did have something called Women of Unity. And I remember saying to the president, she was suggesting that we have a tea party or something. And I said, great, that's a good idea. But let me do it. I actually asked her because the feeling, the enthusiasm, the zeal with which I saw a tea party, in my mind's eye, that desire. Dr. Maya seen downstairs looking really pretty, the white tablecloths on the table and so on. I wasn't sure that anyone else could, visualize that. And one of the things, the words from the Bible that stick with me is where there's no vision, you need that vision to prosper. And I said, I'll tell you, I'll keep you posted as to everything we're going to do. I'm not going to do it alone. We're all going to do it. And I just got everyone excited about this function that we were going to have. And we ended up not having enough tickets because we had sold out, because downstairs at Unity, as those of us who live here know, you can only have a certain number of people. And I just got, every Sunday we met and we discussed what we wanted to do. And there was a general feeling of seeing it real, believing it, that it would work. And I have never forgotten that. And when I desire something, I go back to those things that happened in my experience to remind me what it needs to get it done by, you not just wanting it, but seeing it, but having the desire and feeling it, the vibrations you would get when one, like I saw it. I saw these little baby girls and boys. We did a fashion show. My youngest model was just about 1.5 years. And I could just see it. And like he said, like the minister said, once you have that, things come in to help you. And there
That's
was
right.
this group of young people saying to me, they called me Auntie Wilma. Auntie Wilma, we'll help you with it. And they took over the whole modeling idea and bringing the kids. And I would just sit and look and realize that just by us being excited, we were able to produce something that even until now, people say to me, so when are you going to do another tea party? I say, been there, done that. Been there, done that. So
Well, yeah.
I was able to listening to him this afternoon, I was able to, relate to what he was saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to remember a profound and powerful truth that whenever we are able to envision passionately and to desire passionately, we see results.
Yes.
Yep.
And it should hold for anything, like you said, for healing, for anything.
That's right.
If no one else has anything to say, I have another example to give you. If I may, is that okay?
Sure. Sure.
Years ago, I had an intestinal bleed because according to my history, my medical history, I have a bleeding disorder. And years ago, I had an intestinal bleed, which took me to the hospital to spend almost a week. And my hematologist and so on, they really worked on me and so on. And while they were working on me medically, I was working on myself spiritually. I was envisioning, I visualized the cells of my body doing what they're supposed to be doing, that if the blood was flowing like a tap, I visualized turning off the taps because you're not supposed to be bleeding here. And I was not, I worked with, there's a book, what's the name of the author? Oh, Lord, I don't remember right now, but you've called that name already, Dr. Meyer. And I was working with that book as well. And I had my notebook. And I mean, the nurses would come in to see me and they would be worried because I was busy writing and reading and really working spiritually on myself. I spent a week in the hospital and I told my doctor I was not spending Eastern Hospital. I said, I'm not spending Eastern Hospital. She wanted to do a test, which she said, if you leave the hospital, I'll have to get permission from the government because it was an expensive test at the time. So it's better for you to stay and I'll try to get the test done before you leave, which she did. And I came out of the hospital and every day I had to go to hematology for them to take my blood to see what my HB level was like. And one evening I came home and I felt as if I needed to go to the washroom, like if I was having a diarrhea. And when I went, it was not that, it was just a whole flush of blood. I went upstairs and I got my bag ready to call the doctor. And I know the first thing she would have said is go straight to the hospital. And then I looked at myself and I looked at the bag and I said, where is your faith? You're not going back to that hospital tonight. Do you believe or don't you believe? And I use words from the Bible. Jesus died for your sins, and by his stripes, you are healed. Tonight, I am healed. I am not going back to the hospital. You are healed, Wilma. And that was in 2011. 2 days later, I had to go for the usual blood test. And the nurse frantically called me at home. She said, Mrs. Edwards, your HB dropped. Are you okay? I said, yes, I am. She said, but why did it drop? I said, I don't have a clue. I only shared that story with my hematologist about a year ago because I never told them what happened. I shared the story with her a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you even listening to you talk inspires me to think about Easter, this Easter, and having a celebration in Montreal, really thinking about that, an opening celebration. So thanks for sharing, Wilma. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, do you have anything before we lose people that in any way you could say something about, Marvin is taking us really into a very much his own metaphysics with the numbers and the Bible and philosophy and I feel like I'm right back in seminary school in Missouri. But I was thinking about your system of levels of awareness, the third and the fourth dimension. And do you want to say anything about,
I think Wilma just did a great job of talking about transforming awareness from the third dimension, from the physical explanation of what's happening to a faith-based spiritual expectation. That's basically what that was.
Okay.
A transformation in a dimensional transformation. And the other thing that really, really struck me about what Marvin said is his, like I said last time, I really love how he's applying the creation allegory to spiritual awareness and to metaphysical representation, if you will. But his statement about how important it is to move beyond what we desire for our own selves into an awareness that, hey, we have the potential in being here to make a big difference around us in the world. And it's not by doing in the physical sense. It's by allowing the universe to work in us as, our being here is about expressing love and expressing a divine conception of, what is life and what is life about. So when he said to assume that abundance is the basic principle of how divinity works, how creation works. The idea that we become a seed,
Yes.
that we allow that to happen, that we say yes, and then that we hold that idea and allow it to happen, because in the idea is the fulfillment. That is a radical transformation of awareness.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that whole thing about don't be a lead.
Yeah, that was really cool. So to me, that is a powerful message, and it's what I've experienced in my own life.
Right.
That, when I finally got to a point where I could say yes, no matter how crazy an idea sounded. But when I knew that it was mine to do, and I could say yes and allow it to happen, and not feel like I need to do all kinds of things to make it happen.
Yes.
That's a whole different dynamic.
It is massive. It is massive. This whole, and it's so comforting that, this whole purpose of my soul is actually coming toward me. I don't have to, worry about it. I don't have to worry. It will reveal itself if I'm willing, if I'm asking, if I'm looking. What he said.
If we desire.
And the desire of, there is Nicole. You want to say something?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Marvin. Thank you to you. Thank you to Reverend Hayes. And as I have diligently followed this from the beginning, I retain everything resolves in the reconciliation of the opposites. That is one thing I retain. And I retain the power of desire, the power of desire. Maybe because I'm not used to sharing all that much, but that's where I am. And it is so beautiful. And I am so grateful. And that's it. There are no really opposites. They're just a reconciling of the human with the divine. That's where I'm at. The reconciling of the human with the divine. And I am happy for all of this. So I am grateful. I am thankful for all of you there, and all of you there, you are in my prayer circle of prayers, and you have been, along with so many others. And I am grateful. So
Thanks
that's
for
it.
I can see the radiance as you're talking. Thank you. Thank you. Shall we come to a close, and on this very, very tender note that just came across from Nicole? Shall we? What do you think? Yes, Pauline?
I just want to say thank